All right, today, well, not today, for the last 14,000 years, we've been walking through 1 Corinthians chapter 13, which is affectionately known as the love chapter of Scripture. A lot of times if you've been to a wedding or something, this will be read. And the reason it's so important for us, the reason we're spending so much time on it, is the best analogy I can think of for it is no matter how great a building is, it's nothing unless it's got a solid foundation. And a foundation cannot be strong unless the materials that make up the foundation are solid. Okay, so you might go, okay, I want to build the world's biggest tower. Well, that's great. If you put it on sand, that thing's going to fall over. So what you build it on has to be as strong as how high you want it to be. In fact, the higher you want it to go, the wider that base has got to be. And not only does it have to be wider, the materials that make up the foundation, the concrete that you're using, the slab that you're pouring has to be stronger and stronger still. This is what love is, okay? Love is the material that builds the foundation that erects the life of purpose, okay? So if the end goal of almost anyone, whether it be the people on The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, or it be the person playing a professional sport, or you and me, no matter what it is, we want to live a fulfilled and contented life. That's what we want. Well, here's what we know about a life like that only exists if you have healthy, loving relationships, okay? You've never met someone who is completely content and that is telling the truth and honestly is fulfilled without healthy relationships. We weren't built that way. We were built needing one another, and so healthy relationships are important to a life of purpose. And if healthy relationships are important for the life of purpose, then love is the most important part of healthy relationships. Henceforth, learning what love is correctly leads to healthy relationships, leads to a life of purpose. So if our end goal is to erect this life that means something, that is fulfilled and we have joy and we're content in this life, well, that won't happen unless we have healthy relationships. That's the foundation. But that foundation won't stand if what makes up the foundation, the love, the understanding, isn't in place. So that's the significance of this. It's not just for its own sake. It's for the sake of a life lived for Jesus on purpose. So we begin. 1 Corinthians chapter 13 starts like this. I will show you now the most excellent way, Paul says. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels but have not love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom, that means to understand all mysteries and all knowledge, if I have a faith that can move mountains but have not love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and surrender my body to the flames but have not love, I gain nothing. So Paul starts once again by tearing apart common misconceptions about what love is, okay? He says, look, it says this even later in the chapter. When you were a child, you talked like a child, you thought like a child, you acted like a child. But now that you've grown up, you have to put your childish ways behind you. So he starts by a few of the childish ways of understanding. If you think that you love people just because you talk flowery, it says if you talk in the tongues of men and of angels. So if you walk around, you're like, oh, I love people, I love you, I love you, I love you. But then when you look at your life, there's no model of it, there's no example of it, you're not living it out, then what Scripture says is, well, then you're just annoying. You just bug people. You're all talk and no walk. So because you can't just walk around saying you love people like that's going to be some kind of like cosmic prescription to fix your life. You have to actually do it. The next thing he says is, and it's not just a head knowledge thing. You can't just go to church and go, I get how to love. That doesn't make you loving. That just means you understand that what you're doing wrong is actually wrong. That's all it means. If you get love and you don't practice love, then what James says is you're like a man who looks at himself in the mirror and then forgets what he looks like. So if you know what to do in love, but you just don't do it, then it says right there, then you are nothing. That's what it says in Scripture. The third part, he says, and if you give everything you have to the poor and surrender your body to the flames. In other words, if you think that love is just, I'm going to give everything I have at all moments and sacrifice my body, my time, my talents, my effort, my energy, then you have mistaken what love is for what sacrifice is, or maybe even martyrdom. Because that's not love. Now, can there be sacrifice in love? Does love sometimes require sacrifice? Yes, but that's not as simple as it is. So in a relationship, if you're in a relationship with a boy, and that guy wants you to do whatever he wants to do, and you just keep giving to him, don't pretend like you love him. That's called codependency, okay? But we mistake those two things, okay? Codependency often masquerades itself as affection. So we go, he loves me, he loves me, he loves me, and I just give him everything he wants at all times. That's not love. That's called martyrdom, okay? That's called codependency. That's an inability to separate where you and they begin. So don't go like, we're so romantic because I need them. That's not what love is. Love doesn't need other people. It is a choice love. The working definition we've been working with for love here in 11:12 is this. Love is an act of the will accompanied by emotion that judiciously acts on behalf of its object for their spiritual growth. Okay? And so week after week, as we go through all these different phrases in 1 Corinthians 13, what we're learning is love is not this big, flowery, Beauty and the Beast, bigger than us, the heart wants what it wants kind of crap. It's not that. It is a choice, decision. It is built in your volition and in your will. It's not outside in the flowery part of you where you have no control and it's just your ethos and Cupid shoots who he wants to shoot, and Cupid does his own thing, and that naked baby, sometimes it doesn't matter. If he shoots you, then you're good to go. And everyone's got a soulmate kind of crap over here. And what 1 Corinthians 13 says is that's a childish way of getting this. And if you carry that into adult relationships, your adult relationships will blow. Your marriage will fall apart. If you think that it's just this Cupid, what you're going to figure out early on is, guess what? You and your spouse weren't really made for each other. When I say that, I mean, if God were to construct someone who was your perfect complement, who understood you perfectly, who you understood perfectly, you're not going to marry that person. You will not marry them, okay? They don't exist. But if you think to yourself, well, then maybe I just found the wrong person. On to the next one. On to the next one. On to the next one. I'm still on this hunt for the perfect guy. Well, you are going to be hunting till you're dead because it doesn't exist. 1 Corinthians 13 calls us to become, not to be searching for. Okay? What does it mean to become someone that is suited for marriage? Not to simply look for someone to complete us and to fix our insufficiencies in love. For how foolish is it to find completion in someone who is incomplete themselves? It just doesn't make any sense. Okay? So, after ripping apart all those preconceptions, Paul fills them by going, here's what love looks like. Love is patient. And a few weeks ago we said patience does not mean that you enjoy waiting. It means that when you're waiting, you don't complain about things. It's that simple, okay? It's a choice thing. Love is a choice thing, and patience is a choice thing. And whenever God gives us a choice to make, he's also given us the resources to bring it to fruition, okay? How do I know that? Because it says when God breathed life into us, he gave us a spirit of power, love, and self-discipline, which means you are capable of changing. So don't go back to your heritage and go, well, I'm an impatient person, because you know all of us white people are just naturally impatient. That's what we do, right? Or no, if you understood, it's a black person thing. Or, well, if everyone that's Hispanic. No, it has nothing to do with it. You might have certain predispositions based on your cultural upbringing or what your parents did, but that doesn't mean you're subject to those things. That means you have a choice to become victim to those circumstances or victor over those circumstances. And 1 Corinthians 13 calls you to victory. And God gives you the ability for victory. 1 Corinthians 13 continues. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it's not rude, it's not self-seeking, it's not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, it rejoices with the truth. What's cool is week after week, as we've been tackling more of these things, those are all kind of illuminated more in your head, aren't they? These aren't just little phrases we say anymore. When we say the words, love keeps no record of wrongs, you have a full sermon now on what that looks like. When it says, love does not delight in evil, it rejoices in the truth, we talked about judging last week and what it means to judge properly, okay? And here's where we're going to camp today. Verse 7. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. Love always protects. That's what we're going to focus on today. That word protects. So, again, the challenge here is we have to move from an infant understanding of what love is to an adult understanding of what love is. So if you've historically just skimmed past that protection thing, or if you think all it means to protect someone is that you have to have a concealed carrier permit or that you have to beat people up, if you think that's how you love people, you just kind of exercise dominance over them at all times, then again, what it says is you need to move from that childish understanding of love to a mature understanding of love. Why? Because what you did when you were a child is not appropriate anymore. Okay? To illustrate that, we just bought a new house over here right off of Melrose in North Santa Fe. You guys can stop by anytime if you're invited. And so I'm like, okay, should we hire a lawn service or whatever? And I'm like, you know what? No. I'm going to get on Craigslist. I'm going to buy a mower. I'm going to do my thing. So I got little shears, and I got a hedge trimmer, and I got a weed whacker, and an edger, and a lawnmower, and I got it all. It was a very manly day for me, okay? And I'm walking out, and I start it, and this lawnmower's except it's electric, so it's So I'm pushing, and I'm cutting all this stuff, and my son comes out, and he is in this phase right now where he wants to help dad with everything, which is crazy because my honey-do list is long, okay? If you don't know a honey-do list, whenever you get married, if you get married, you probably get married. And if you're a man, as soon as you move into the house, your wife is so happy, and then she goes, but what if we, and she does that 400,000 times. What if this wall was a little bit, and what if we did, and then I've got my own honey-do list for myself. I'm oh man, I got to change that, I got to fix that. And generally speaking, our honey-do lists are very different. She wants to paint junk, and I want to build a bigger barbecue. You know what I mean? It's not exactly the same. But my wife is awesome at that kind of stuff. So my honey-do list, I bring my son with me whatever I do. Okay? I just think it's very important. All right? I want to teach him how to do this stuff. Or even if it's just insignificant, yesterday I fixed our couch. And so I'm okay, you push this piece of wood. He wasn't doing anything. But in his head, he was the fulcrum by which this whole exercise was going to work or not work. Okay? That's in his head. So I'm out there mowing the lawn. My son's potty training, so he runs around our house just stark naked at all times. Okay? So he comes out in the lawn, in the front, and my son asks me all the time, what are you doing? And I'm I'm mowing the lawn. He didn't get what that meant, so I had to find some grass and show him, look how tall it is, now look how short it is. And he thought that was so cool. And he goes, I want to do it. I want to help. And what's he going to do? If he stands in front of it, I'm going to literally mow him over. He's too small to push it. He's too weak to get it to move. The inertia of that lawnmower is not going to allow him to really practice or help at all. So we get out his little lawnmower that blows bubbles, and he just follows me around the lawn, okay? Buck naked. I'm doing this. I'm actually doing something, and he's doing nothing. And as people are driving by, I'm just giving him the old wave, and Peyton's they're he's so cute. He's I can't right now, guys. Sorry. I'm mowing the lawn. The little bubbles coming out, and he's popping him. He's that's just what he's doing, okay? Now, people were walking by, in a wagon, and this 3-year-old rides by, and he goes, ho, someone's naked. That's what he said to my son. And I was you're eccentrically confident, and it kind of creeps me out. You're too young to be that confident in yourself. Something's wrong with you, or you're secretly 35 years old in a 3-year-old's body. Either way, please get off my lawn. You terrify everyone around you. So he says that, and then his mom's how old is he? And I'm he's 2.5. She goes, precious. And then she leaves. Now, why did that interchange happen that way? Why did I recommend he walk around naked outside and push a fake lawnmower behind me? Why? Because he's 2. If he's 22, the whole interchange changes. Number 1, as soon as I see him around the house naked, I go, put clothes on, move out of the house, stop mooching off my food, get a real lawnmower. Heck, you do the lawn by yourself. And if he walks outside naked, when they walk by, the 3-year-old's not going to go, looks like someone's naked. The mom is going to cradle that kid in her chest, shield him, and scream, how old are you? It won't be a congenial one. It won't be inquisitive. It will be accusatory. It'll be, how old are you? And then she'll call the cops, and he'll go to jail. Why? Because he's old. He's too old to think and act like that anymore. And when it comes to protecting one another, what this is saying is if you're going to actually love each other, you need to know that you need to, in a mature way, protect one another. What does it mean in our relationships to protect one another? Your knee-jerk reaction when I say the word relationships and when I talk about your beloved and people that you love is you're going to naturally think of a boyfriend you have or don't have or girlfriend you have or don't have, and that is a gross misuse of what love is. Okay? Love is not subject to only who you deal with romantically. In fact, most of you, as soon as you get married, you will only practice romance with one human being. However, you will practice love with many other people. So think of this when we use the term loving and loving one another, and think about your friendships, think about your relationship with your parents, think about your relationship with your siblings. This is how you can love one another instead of just a way that's romantic. Romantic love is important, but it's just one menial aspect of how grandiose love is. Okay? In fact, every time God speaks about love in Scripture, about his love for us, it never has to do with romance. So for us to naturally assume all love is romantic is to completely misunderstand God's love for us. For he is not wanting anything. And we are not any kind of an object of desire for God romantically. So it can't just mean your romantic relationships. So what does it mean that love protects? Well, in the English language, we have a million words, something like that we use for anything. Which is why when people are speaking, they'll be like, wow, you use big words. Why? Because every time we want to say a word, we've got a lot of options as to what we want to say. Like if I want to say, there's a lot of instruments on stage, I could say, there's a lot of instruments on stage. Or I could say, there are many instruments on stage. Or I could say, there's a bunch of instruments on stage. Or I could say, there is copious amounts of instruments. Or there's a cornucopia of instruments on stage. Or there's a plethora of them, right? There's all these different words we have. Well, Greek and Hebrew, especially this kind of Greek, it's kind of like Pidgin English. It's like a Koine Greek. It was common man Greek. It was the Greek that all of the tekton, the carpenters would use with one another back in that day. You had formal Greek, but the Bible is written to the layman. It's written to the people who were out in the fields like pulling barley and doing stuff like that. They spoke this kind of a Pidgin English, right? You know what Pidgin English is? Like, if you ever have a Pidgin English Bible, they're really cool to read. Like the Pidgin English version of John 3:16 is like, for the God so loved the people that he gave the Son to give for all demand. So it's just very like, it's like C-spot run, C-spot do this. It's like, it's extremely simple. Go dogs go. It's like this very, very elementary understanding. Well, in that case, Koine Greek, it does the opposite of the English language. We have 87 words for one thing, but the Koine Greek has one word for 87 things, and you use context to figure out what word you're trying to say. Okay? So there's a word in Hebrew that, depending on context, can either mean to act like a prostitute or to give glory to your spouse. Obviously, you would use context to find out what it's trying to say. But the Hebrew language has just a fraction of what the English language has. So right here, we see this played out. Okay, this word to protect is this word stego. S-T-E-G-O. Stego is the Greek word that's used right there. And what stego means is it means to protect, but it actually manifests itself in three different ways. There's three different forms of this idea of protection. Okay? I'm going to give you all three of those things today and what each of those implicate to understand what it means to love one another while we protect one another. Number one is this. The first thing that stego can mean is to cover something. So what does it mean when Paul is writing right here? He says, love covers things. Love is patient, love is kind, doesn't envy, doesn't boast, is not rude, is not self-seeking, is not easily angered, keeps no record of wrongs, doesn't delight in evil, rejoices in the truth. It always covers things. What does it mean it always covers things? Well, this is the same word in Scripture that's used for atonement. Okay? So when Jesus died on the cross, he covered us. So pictured if my son was here with me, or my son and daughter were here with me, and they're right here, and the roof starts to collapse, okay? And the debris is going to fall, and I get on them, and I allow all the shrapnel from the ceiling to dive into my flesh, and for that to collapse on me, and I create a covering for them. This is what God did for us. God, on the cross, covered you and I. For the wrath of God that was supposed to be poured out on us, God covered us, and it hit him instead. This is what Jesus did. This is a word that we get for atonement. Okay? We were made at one-ment with God when he covered us. We became his children in that moment, okay? Now, we have to assimilate that information and go, well, I can't love like God does. I'm not as strong as God is. So what does it mean for us as people to protect one another through covering? Here's what it looks like. The first part is, how do we physically cover one another? How do you, with the people that you love, how do you physically cover them? Okay? How do you physically cover them? Okay? The simple question to ask yourself is, would you sacrifice your comfort for their well-being? Sometimes it even means having hard conversations. Would you sacrifice the comfort of a moment? You have them over for a sleepover and everything, and you know there's something that you want to bring up with them, but you're like, well, we're having a great night. I wouldn't want to ruin it. And the next day, it's the same thing. And then eventually you go, well, that was so long ago. Is it even worth bringing up? So you're so comfortable in that moment that you're not willing to have a hard conversation. You're going to create physical discomfort. Number 2, how do you cover them emotionally? Okay, the question is, how do you speak to them? What do you call them? Okay, how are they known to you? Now, a phrase that we use that's pretty common with this age group is, maybe you've heard someone say, like, I speak sarcasm, or I speak sarcasm fluently, or my love language is sarcasm. That's not actually a love language, just so you guys understand that. And it's not that that way isn't efficient in your relationships. It's what it says, what's the first line of 1 Corinthians chapter 13? I will show you the most excellent way. That's what it starts with. He's going, look, you might have other ways, and in your relationship, you might be like, well, I'm not very patient, and we still make it work. And he goes, okay, I get what you're saying. That's not the most excellent way. That will not be sufficient for your whole life. The people who in your life are this, the word I want to use is safe haven. What does it mean to provide a safe haven for your beloved? The people that you love in your life, do they view you as this? Here's what it says in the book of Proverbs 18. The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run to it and are safe. And don't you get this picture of the father being like the dad on the playground, like the recess coordinator? What do they call him these days? Who knows? What do you guys call him? The yard duty? Whatever. So when I was growing up, we had a volunteer. I went to a private Lutheran school, and there was like only 68 kids at the whole school, K through 12. And so my dad would have to volunteer to come and be the yard duty manager. And I would remember I would play tag with people and stuff like that, but pretty frequently with a bunch of dudes, we would start a fight somehow. It's Tulsa, Oklahoma. We weren't super civilized. So we'd like throw rocks at each other. I one time got accused of starting a mob. I had to go to the principal's office. It was weird. Just because I told one guy to beat up one girl and he did it. It's like, oh, I'm a mob leader now. But anyway. But I'm not guilty of that, and I'm quoting a district judge on this one. So after that, my dad comes and he organizes recess and stuff like that. And I remember this guy named Nick Post, he got really mad at me. And he starts chasing me. And this guy's a big old dude. Like, he could have just rocked me. And I ran, and my dad was yard duty, and I jumped, and he caught me, and he brought me up here. And I was probably like 5, 6 years old. And Nick was down there. And I could no longer care at all what Nick had to say or what Nick was going to do. Because my dad could punt him into next week. Like, my dad's big and he's strong. I'm up here. And this is what it says. This is what God is to us. He's a father that we run to. When the things of this world are collapsing, he says, you run to me. The righteous run to me and you're safe. I'm a safe haven for you. Okay? How can we be that to one another? And emotionally, the way that we can do that for one another is the constant calling one another names on the altar of sarcasm or under the guise of sarcasm that we make these little jabs at one another. They begin to deteriorate people, I think. No, I don't think. I know. And we cover it up by going, oh, it's okay, they totally understand. But we bully people, but we call it sarcasm. And we mistreat people, and we call it sarcasm. And this is what Paul's saying, going, look, that was okay. And if this is the way you've been in relationships, that really was okay. But when you were a child, you were able to think and talk like a child. But now you've become mature. The people that we respect most, like my mentor's name is Dr. Ebel. He treats me with such endearment every time I talk to him. He would never walk up and be like, what's up, moron? Just kidding. Like, that hurts. Even if you're well, I'm being sarcastic. Right? The people that we really do look at as safe havens, there's a more excellent way to interact with one another. And if up to this point there's been so much guy-girl liking in 9:10 through 9:10 and then in 11:12, you might not know how to relate to the opposite gender except through tearing them down in sarcasm, but it's time to grow up. It's time that you're able to go, we're going to walk through this life together with one another. I'm going to honor you. You're going to respect me. And I want to be there for you, and you can be there for me. And let's be a brother and sister, but not the kind that fight over the dinner table, but that if anyone comes after you, they're going to have to go through me first. And if anyone has anything negative to say about you, they're going to have to get through me first. This is when the church is firing on all cylinders. We are weak when we are divided. So find a different way to approach it. Are we a spiritual safe haven for one another? Okay, that's the third part of the first part, which is to cover. Do we cover each other spiritually? Okay? This means that if someone in your life that you claim to love is walking down a path that's going to lead them to sin and ultimately separation from God, and you don't step in, can you really claim to love them? No, you can't. Again, if you want to parse that out to its furthest degree, last week I taught a whole sermon on that. So you can go back and love does not delight in evil, it rejoices in the truth. You can go back and watch that. Okay? Number 2, after to cover, the second way that stego can mean is it can mean to conceal. Okay, to conceal. Okay, so some of you ladies in here, you use concealer. What does concealer do? It hides things, right? Just like me. It hides my imperfections. Which some of you guys are like, what imperfections? That's because I'm wearing concealer. Okay. And because my wife's not paying attention, I put on her makeup. Because I'm young and I need the money. Okay, to conceal. Number 1, what do we conceal for people? Secrets are important to conceal, okay? And you may be like, well, secrets are no fun. Secrets hurt someone. Yeah, that is not a thing. I'm pretty sure no one's ever said that knew what they were talking about, okay? But here's what happens in Scripture. Rahab in Joshua chapter 2 keeps a secret. Hebrews chapter 11, Deuteronomy 29:29, God keeps secrets. In Matthew chapter 9, verse 30, Jesus asked the people to keep secrets, okay? So there's a place and a time for secrets, okay? There are certain things in your life that, if exposed, actually do much more harm than good. Now, here's what I mean by that. You should have certain people by which you live in a glass house with them, okay? What do I mean by that? I mean, your small group, you should be able to build a place of trust enough that everyone in there knows what you struggle with, what you're going through, what your deficiencies are, what your fears are, what your insecurities are. But that doesn't mean that everybody and their mom needs to know that stuff, okay? But it does mean that you do have secrets. And that if you're going to love people, there's going to be certain things you know about them that you know are not beneficial to share, that you're going to be tempted to share because your own insecurity tells you that people listen when you tell secrets. That is a childish way of living, right? We did that in kindergarten. Like, oh, well, I'm not supposed to tell you this. And don't tell anyone. But it's like, yeah, that was appropriate when you were 7. It's no longer appropriate. You should be that safe haven. You should be that concealer for somebody. That you are that steel trap as far as a conversation goes. Now, here's the caveat. A caveat means exception. The exception to that rule is if someone tells you a secret that is immediately harmful to them or somebody else, then you are no longer loving by keeping it. That's where everything changes, okay? So last week I was teaching at Hume San Diego, and this girl comes up to me and she goes, I'm going to tell you something I've never told anyone else before, but you have to promise not to tell anyone. And here's what I told her. I said, I love you too much to promise that. She said, oh, but what do you mean you love me too much? You mean you don't love me enough? I go, no, I love you way too much to promise you that I'm going to keep your secret. Why? Because what if she walked up to me and she goes, you promise? And I go, yeah, I promise. And she goes, okay, well, tonight I'm going to end my own life. And I go, okay, my lips are sealed. Does anyone really go, no? So I don't make that promise with people. If we're going to do life together, there's certain things that if you tell me, I'm going to share with people because I love you too much to not do that. But that means there's immediate threat or danger to someone or themselves, okay? The fact that someone kissed someone on the basketball court is not immediate danger to anyone. You're like, well, I better tell this to someone or else someone's going to get hurt. No, that's not the case, okay? The other thing we conceal is their insecurities and their fears. The crazy thing about when we let people into our life, into that position of vulnerability, C.S. Lewis has this awesome quote, and he says, if you want your heart to never be broken, then hide everything away in a casket and coffin of your own selfishness. Don't open your heart up to anyone. Don't let anyone into your life. Just don't worry about anything but yourself. Be completely self-consumed. He says, but in that dark place, in that coffin of your selfishness, your heart will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. To love is to be vulnerable. What does he mean by that? When he says that phrase, he says, if you guys are actually loving, there's going to be quote chinks in your armor. You're not going to be this holistic, like no one can ever hurt me kind of a person if you love people genuinely. They're going to have access to your heart. They're going to have access to hurt you. My wife has been granted this fat green light to just wreck me if she wanted to. Why? Because she knows my biggest insecurities that you might not know. She knows my biggest fears. She knows how intrinsically terrified I am of not being a good dad and how hard I try at being a good dad. Some of you guys might not know that. So if you came to insult me, you'd be like, you're tall and dumb looking. I'd be like, so? Also, my wife is so much hotter than your wife, so shut up. Like, that's what I would tell you. Like, that she is my validation. I'm like, I might be goofy looking, but look what I did. So who cares what you think? I mean, come on. And look how cute my kids are. That wasn't me, but I still get to reap the benefit, so I did better than you. Thank you. How you like them apples, okay? I got a number. How do you like them apples? That's what I would do, okay? Now, it wouldn't hurt me at all. But if she walked up to me and she said, you're kind of an absentee father. Death. Death immediately, okay? Why? Because she knows, and she would be the best judge of that. She knows me enough that if she said that, she would actually have information to make an empirical argument that I wasn't a good dad. Ouch. If you were like, you're a bad dad, I'd be like, you're an idiot. Shut up, okay? Because what do you know? What do you know about being a father? And what do you know about me being a father? Very little. But the people we're most vulnerable with do know that stuff, and that's when it hurts. The more information, the more we open ourselves, the more vulnerable we are, the bigger that chink in our armor becomes, okay? So, we conceal each other's insecurities and fears. Lastly is to preserve. That's the third thing that stego can mean. It means to preserve something, okay? I'm going to say the word sex a lot right now, but let it happen, okay? The number one way that we're going to talk about that with preserving one another is we're preserving one another sexually, okay? Don't think in terms of boyfriend and girlfriend now. Think in terms of you and your small group. Here's what I mean by that, okay? Let me just put it in a really uncomfortable way, but I have to because that's my job, all right? I'm going to use Cade and Ethan. Okay, do you love Cade? Yeah. What? Okay, do you love Ethan?
Yes.
You do?
Yeah.
Okay, so you practice this stuff with him. You push him towards spiritual growth. You're more concerned for himself than you are for your friendship. You're willing to have hard conversations if they need to be had. You love him.
Yeah.
You love him. Okay. Therefore, when it means to protect one another, are you willing to do whatever it takes to preserve him in every aspect of what it means to love somebody? Including what it means to preserve him sexually. Do you care enough about him to call him on the carpet if there was going to be something in his life that would make him, for his future spouse, a worse sexual partner or a worse lover? Do you love him enough to say something about that? You would. Because here's what we're finding out. Here's the great irony of the church. The church, we have had sex stripped from us, okay? God invented sex. When Adam and Eve were in the garden and they started procreating, God wasn't like, oh no, they fit perfectly. What happened? Who's done this? How did they figure that out? They weren't supposed to use those. This should open your head a little bit to who God is. God invented sex. Miley Cyrus did not invent sex, okay? Pop culture did not invent sex. God invented sex, okay? And he gave it to us as a wedding gift. And he went, hey, I made something really neat. Here you go, right? That's so cool about who our God is. But here's what we're finding out. The way that God built sex and the reason he built it and how he constructed us and how he built different parts of our brain was to connect to one person for all the time that we're here on our planet. The whole time, one person. And now GQ magazine is starting to come out and go, turns out those Christians were right. Over and over again, the New England Journal of Psychology and everyone else are running these tests, and here's what they're doing. They're putting different electrodes and stuff like that on people while they are engaging in sex, which I feel like would be uncomfortable, but I am not a judge. So what they're finding out is the 21-year-old frat boy who is having sex with whomever he wants, whenever he wants, kind of freely expressing himself sexually. It's this whole 21st America, your body, your choice. Those who are actually practicing your body, your choice the most report the lowest levels of vasopressin in sex, the lowest levels of oxytocin in sex, and the lowest levels of dopamine in sex. Oxytocin is a connecting chemical, vasopressin is a long-term connecting chemical, and dopamine is a joy chemical. In other words, if you want to have good sex, you will wait and have it with one person. 40 and 50-year-olds who have been married for like 20 or 30 years report the highest levels of dopamine, vasopressin, and oxytocin. Those that we look at and we go, that guy's like James Bond, he has sex whenever he wants. He actually has the worst sex. He is a worse lover than 45-year-old dads that were like, that guy's lame. It's like, but he's having better sex than Johnny Steroids over here, right? That's just, oh, look, I'm going to have sex. Look, that's how God made us. So if you truly care enough about Cade to preserve the fact that someday, hopefully, Cade's going to be married to someone, and if you want your friends to have a great sexual life with their partner, then you would not let him settle for something cheaper. You wouldn't let him settle for being a bad lover. Man, I know that's a weird phrase to say from a pastor, but when you think about it, can you really call yourself loving to someone if you don't give a rip whether or not they've got a strong and healthy sexual appetite and libido for their future spouse? This is what pornography does to people. This is what casual sex does. It ruins the lover that you're supposed to be. So can you really love someone and push them towards being a bad lover, knowing that sex is such an important part of marriage? So, because I've given way too many purity talks about don't have sex because God doesn't want you to. You don't care. You just don't care. Because sex is such that driving force. Maybe you'll care enough about your future to go, man, I don't want to be a crap lover. And I don't want my friends to be bad lovers in their marriages, so I am going to work to preserve just myself and them sexually because I don't want to be a C- lover when I get older. And this is what God says, John 10:10. I want to give you life and give it to you abundantly. You want to know what part of abundant life is? Having good sex. You want to know how you do have bad sex? Have sex all the time with a bunch of people. That will create in you to be a bad sexual partner. You're like, well, that's not the... Well, when we want to get better at baseball, you practice baseball. When you want to drive better, you drive... Yeah, but here's what you misunderstood about that whole thing. What happens in sexual experiences is beyond anything else, and it's incomparable. Your brain releases this cosmic cocktail of connection that it gets watered down over time, and then your brain stops releasing the cocktail at all because it says, we've been screwed over way too many... That's a terrible phrase to use right here. We've been mistaken so many times because you've told us to connect to all these different random things and images on a computer. And now we're not going to connect to anything because we're not going to be hoodwinked again. Sex, and you're going to go, why do I still feel empty? Because your brain has shut off from connecting. The vasopressin, oxytocin, and dopamine that are supposed to be excreted, your brain goes, yeah, right. You're not connecting to them. You've done this before. You're not connecting to them. That's a lie. You're just trying to do the same thing you've done over and over again. So what do people do? They have more and more sex. It becomes more and more novel. It comes with more and more people at weirder and weirder times. That's what we do with sex. So what God says is you need to start by renewing your mind. That means you need to take a step out of it, and your brain will reform itself to understanding what good sex is. Your brain will fix itself. It will heal itself, and you'll go back. But you have to have friends that love you enough to push you in that direction. I'm going to end with this simple illustration. In the 1990s, there was an airline called Korea Air. And Korea Air constantly was having planes go down. But they also had some of the best planes and the best pilots ever. They were highly trained. They were highly motivated. They were highly skilled. And the mechanics and everything were top notch. And yet, they were losing planes faster than any other airline on the planet. And they started finding their black boxes. The black box is like this. It's a communication device. And so they would find those, and they would talk through them, and they would find out what crashed the plane. Here's what they're finding out. In Korean culture, there is such an idea of respect toward your elders. The co-pilot, who were almost always younger than the pilot, would make suggestions to the pilot based on his readings, and the pilot would ignore it. And instead of getting in his face and going, you really should listen, they would sit docile in the background while they crashed into mountains. So the pilot would go, we're going to go this way. And the co-pilot, in reverence, would go, my readings say there's a mountain right there. And the pilot would go, I think we're going to go there anyway. And not wanting to push back or ruffle feathers or disrespect, the co-pilot would just sit there as they ran into a mountain. You don't want friends like that. This is not life. You don't want friends that go, there's certain disaster ahead, but I think you'll be fine. You want friends that go, moron, what part of mountain didn't you get? It's coming in hot. You will be a worse lover for you. If you will continue to do this worse. If you don't do that, we have to protect one another. Because you're not going to go through this life unscathed. And there will be mountains that present themselves to you. And if you don't have people who love you enough to correct you, you are going to be in your eyes, you're going to be the great pilot of the 21st century, crashing into mountain after mountain after mountain. Because you have no co-pilot. You need to invite people into your life that are going to love you enough to protect you. Let's pray. God, thank you for showing us what protective love looks like. May we model that and display that to everyone else that we see, that they may know that we are yours. In your name we pray. Amen.